A man goes to see his doctor. His doctor says, you're a little bit depressed. Here's what I recommend. Exercise helps. I want you to run or walk for about a mile each day. In addition, I think you might just be stuck in a rut. So I want you to just try going to different places, doing different things that you're just not familiar with, okay? If you're not comfortable, stop it. But just try something different, okay? So the guy says, all right, and he leaves. A week later, the guy calls the doctor back. He says, doctor, I'm 7 miles from home. I have no idea where I am. Can I just have some Prozac? This is Morning Perfect Base. I am Van Velding. I am going to work on my perfect base a little bit each week. And after a few weeks, we are going to see how much progress we've made. Today, I'm working on my catwalks, gangplanks, balconies, all that. I am going to rip this stuff down, replace it with some smooth sandstone slabs, and hopefully make it look a little more technical and a little nicer. I'm also going to have to move around a lot of my banners. I do not have a diagram for this. I'm just going off the cuff, so let's hope it turns out okay. Today's episode is Marianne Williamson and the Invisible Context Problem. You guys may have seen her at the Democratic debates at the end of July. She was a standout candidate. No one knew who she was before. People know who she is now. She was the most Googled candidate coming out of it. She was kind of a star, and I had an instant dislike of her. I've never trusted the kind of optimism that isn't based on some idea. I've always understood that the friendly arm around the shoulder inclusion that people use is done because they want something from you. A friend once told me that sometimes people want to be led, and it doesn't matter where you lead them. And it shakes me a little bit to know that some people honestly think like that. Now, I don't know Marianne Williamson that way, but I do know a little bit about her. She is a native Texan who, in her own words, spent her youth enjoying bad boys and good weed. Her life changed when she read a self-help book called A Course in Miracles by psychologist Helen Schucman. It allegedly changed her life in kind of the obvious ways. She went on to LA on a decision she describes as non-rational, which doesn't mean irrational, which I don't feel like I have to say anything else about this woman at this point. Non-rational, which isn't to say irrational, continues to describe her from that point up until what you saw on the Democratic debate stage. But in the interest of some sort of professional obligation, she wrote her own book and she preached about God, and she created a charity called Project Angel Food, and then she was forced out of it. She went to Detroit to preach at one of those non-denominational Brand X Christian churches. She tried to secede that church from its larger organization, and she was asked to leave after that. She then ran for Congress, and she was not forced out because her campaign failed. And now she is running for president as a charismatic dark horse with no political history. But for Democrats. Another great quote of hers is, what some people call ego, I call personality. Let's get these down here. Man, these have been up here forever. These are kind of like my miscellaneous banners that I just sort of collected. I don't think they're for anything in particular. Right, so in this interview with LA Mag, her wine aunt who believes in crystals facade got disrupted when Monica Corcoran Harrell, the interviewer, threw her some pretty standard curveballs for an individual seeking political office. Who is your daughter's father? What happened with that church secession? Those are reasonable, if edgy, questions, and in both cases, Williamson gets real, gets serious, and breaks that wine bottle to get ready for a proper glassing. How are we doing here? Can we do it like this? I gotta find a way to put all these fucking banners up, and I just don't know if there's going to be enough. Does that work even? Come on. There we go. Yep. Right, yeah, sorry. And that's who I know her as. From reading about her, that is the pattern I see. Hippy dippy, gentle, God loves you, believe in yourself, it's all good in the hood, until shit gets a little uncomfortable. There's a familiar phenomena when people try to talk to white folks about racism, where we tend to be defensive and we label the conversation uncomfortable or disrespectful or offensive. It's called white fragility. The social tools of mild control are leveraged to avoid discomfort. And when you push through those tools of mild social control to have a discussion that's about something important, that's important to have, to try to get past the distraction and hedging, then suddenly you're the aggressor. You're the bad guy. You're not letting them deflect or avoid. And by pressing through, you enable who you're talking to have an emotional response that lets them shut the conversation down anyway. The roadblocks go up to avoid the conversation, and if you push past, they start talking about how you push past the roadblocks. It's a self-contained sphere of aversion, and it's ugly, and it works. So I'm talking about a broader model of white fragility, the basics of what that is based on. And I'm not going to pull out the Henry V thing and go all, aspect of the land, and then switch over to, aspect of the tiger. I'm not going to do the Sarah Palin version of Henry V and give you that shitty pitbull / lipstick joke. If you don't know what I'm talking about, count yourself lucky. Don't even bother fucking Googling it. Williamson's use of fragility is not the sign of a competent, manipulative person, or of a grifter's performance, or a snake charmer who knows how the trick is done. It is the sign of someone who has honestly lived their life on a cloud of privilege and believes what she's saying in the moment she's saying it. She doesn't believe it. She doesn't believe anything except that good things happen to her because she's a good person and also money. She is an empty suit and has been telling people things that make them feel good, and who has been doing things that admittedly are pretty good. So let's get gay. Because all of this has been a prelude. Marianne Williamson was an early supporter of AIDS patients. The charity she founded was originally made to bring meals to housebound gay men dying of AIDS in LA. And it did. And it definitely made the lives of a lot of people who were dying alone a little less alone. That wasn't all she brought, though. You see, Marianne Williamson's books are self-help books, specifically self-healing books. She says that people who are overweight generally have some trauma they need to get past. She's an anti-vaxxer, but now that she's running for president, she's hiding behind a cloak of, some vaccines are good, and isn't Big Pharma bad? And let's take a look at the science on both sides. She thinks antidepressants cause mass shootings because depression isn't a real illness. I've done that bit before, and I'm not going to rehash it. Fuck that. She has also said, most centrally to the point I'm making here, AIDS is not more powerful than God. That is a direct quote. I'm sorry, I should have done the voice. You see, she's a faith healer. Without snakes or whammies or speaking in tongues, if God loves you, if you love yourself, if you have faith, then you can overcome it. The believe in yourself platitudes of someone who knows God is real because he makes people write all those little checks. Problem is that when you tell someone they're sick because the world is unnatural and they have to find the purity within, the problem with that is that they don't believe they're sick because a protein-coded genetic sequence is replicating itself inside their body. And so they stop taking the medications that stop protein-coded genetic sequences from replicating in their body. I mean, why would they? If the virus isn't what's making them sick, why pay for antiviral treatments? Marianne Williamson said she never told anyone to stop taking their medication. And honestly, that willful ignorance and moral hedging in the face of a question that would make any decent person pause, if there is a hell, I know it punched her ticket there. If we need a laugh line, here's her description of AIDS. Here are some enlightened visualizations. Imagine the AIDS virus as Darth Vader and then unzip his suit to allow an angel to emerge. You know, they say anyone can be a writer, and they are right. Totally right. She adds a bit later, the healing doesn't come from the pill, it comes from our belief. So people stopped taking medications and they died. Lots of different people. But for the purposes of our narrative focus and your ability to put a specific face on it, gay men suffering from AIDS died because Marianne Williamson told them their faith would save them. Because they believed her. They bought her books and they died. And their money bought her suits and her shoes and her hairstylist and her dental cleanings and I assume one hell of an editor. Something to think about when you see her suits and shoes and hair and $1,000 smile. So now we talk about the meat of it, the invisible context, the notion put forward by Marianne Williamson and people like her, the notion that love or moral purity will save you, that you're inherently perfect in its corruption, trauma, negative feelings, an unnatural society that moves you away from being a skinny, undepressed, not dying of AIDS or cancer person. Consider demands for pay raises. Lots of folks respond with, well, get a different job. Don't change things by creating a disruption. Inflation is planned at 2% year on year by the government, but it's invisible. Treating wages as a natural state of affairs and ignoring the context of inflation. The assumption is that how much people make is determined by the output of some invisible anus, and that it's not the choice of a real person. That person and the choice are invisible, and therefore part of the natural state of things. Consider the notion that drugs and crime are things that spontaneously generate from bad people, the same way that it was once thought that maggots spontaneously generated from spoiled meat. That bad people engage in bad behavior, and that punishing those people is necessary. Punishment that's however bad it has to be to get the desired result. And if they die, well, they were bad people who should have given us our result. Poverty, reactions to social injustices, mental illness, those behind the eyes causes are invisible, and therefore the actions of fraud and assault and addictive behavior mark individuals as innate frauds, assailants, and addicts. Consider professionalism. I was reading about the other day, society as an abstraction. We don't know how so many things in our world work, and we rely on others to have an in-depth knowledge of how those things work. They have education, training, and experience that make them experts in their field, professionals. And yet, we do have people who do not see that education, training, and experience. People for whom knowledge is invisible, but for whom competence is real. You see, you always hear stories about accidents caused by bad doctors or bad pilots or bad scientists or whatever. Those people had knowledge, but hindsight tells us they lacked competence. And even if the problem wasn't one of actual competence, like it was a mechanical failure that no trained individual could have prevented, some people believe that a competent person can always prevent an accident. I won't go into why. It's Hollywood and the media in general, especially shit like Batman and Die Hard, but I won't get into it. So the deal is, if you're a competent person, then don't you already know as much about vaccines as a doctor who might be incompetent? As much about whether the earth is round as a pilot? Education is invisible. Competence is manifest in winners. This points to the idea of an invisible context, a status quo that is natural and which is made unnatural by disruption. Some people are naturally paid less. Some people are born criminals. The world would run fine without engineers and scientists because iPhones and plane flights and medical research could all be done by competent people. And we're all born healthy and made less healthy by the unnaturalness of the world. Low wages for other people, harsh criminal penalties for other people, the inhumane imprisonment of other people, sicknesses and diseases and ostracization, those are natural and required and good, actually. In fixing it, those idiots are the real problem. Everything was good until those guys started rousing rabble. And this system works well if other people are doing worse than you, because they haven't bowed as deeply or as long or as submissively to the prevailing invisible economic and social realities that rule the world. Those fools, those losers. Until you are doing worse. Until you're sick. Until you don't make enough for what you do. Until someone you love is addicted to opioids. And suddenly, despite your moral obsequience, you are being treated as a loser. At that point, you can learn all about that context and lobby to change the system like those fools from earlier, or you can wield their words, and protect your moral standing like an ape brandishing a railgun. Ignore all new information that might help you understand how hardships happen, and find a scapegoat to offer up to the invisible anus of the market. So you have this fucked up situation where two people with the same histories of poverty and drug addiction draw down on each other, one trying to change the system and another saying that the system was fine until the system crushed them, and that was only because someone else was trying to fix it. The invisible context problem is that if there was a point where society was perfect, except for dissent, then the only way to restore society to its natural form is to crush dissent and regress to a time that didn't exist. It doesn't allow for understanding why society fails. It doesn't allow for analysis. It doesn't allow for solutions. It can silence and destroy aberrations, but it cannot solve problems. Folks who believe in invisible context believe angels get more done than fucking taxes. It cannot perpetuate itself across the generational gap that destroys civilizations. No generation that is consumed by the next was ever great. The greatness is not in clinging to imaginary virtues and decrying how your successors don't have them. A society is not great if it cannot raise its successors to want to uphold it. It cannot do that if its belief, its own greatness is rooted in comfort, and a belief in a natural order whose only flaw is change, when the only natural order is change. There is no natural world to go back to, no great America to make again. The solution to stagnant wages isn't getting a higher paying job. The solution to rising incarceration rates and brutal prison conditions isn't to stay out of jail. The solution to misfortune isn't to be blessed by gods. Marianne Williamson represents the thought that God is more powerful than AIDS. The belief that folks who aren't pleasing to the eye are the results of moral impurity or psychological damage. The thought that everything is pleasing to the eye and healthy by nature, and that all departures from that must come from our failings. That hardships in our lives are something internal that we can control. That is convenient for some of us, but a false premise. Sometimes the solutions to problems involve working with other people. It involves upsetting the status quo. It requires change and cooperation. You cannot think yourself to health. You cannot purify the country to greatness. There is no invisible, natural, convenient order to the universe. It's just us. It is just us, and it's just us together. Solving problems, facing facts, and no solution to our problems will magically appear because we need it, or materialize from our past. Our past is filled with ignorance, disease, and magical thinking, charlatans, callous indifference, selfishness. The present has those things too, of course, but the present is the only time we have to abolish them from the future. I think it's looking okay. There's going to be a little gap off to the right there, and I'm going to use that to as a map wall. So I'm going to be able to stand up here on the map wall. Pretty close. They might mess up the perspective a little bit, but I think I'll be okay. I didn't expect the V shape to this catwalk either. I thought for sure I could just kind of lump it across in a big, ugly, Minecraft rectangle. But I think that V looks a little better. So we'll see. Get this down here. Boop. Boop. I have a script for these things, and I estimate word count sometimes. I try to make sure that whatever I'm doing matches the runtime, but it's hard to estimate projects. It's hard to estimate how long it takes me to read things. So I'll wrap up in a bit here, but I have so little left to do. I do want to finish up before I go, but I have nothing to say on that. On the topic at hand, it's hard. It's I don't want to say it's orgasmic, and I'm just like tired, and I don't want to do anything anymore. I just feel completely spent on the subject. After I spend weeks writing it, days writing it, and I have to revise it, I have to research it, and I have to rehearse it, and then I finally sit down to record. It's just nice to have it done. It's also nice to have this done. I didn't think that those structures would work so well together, but I think they really did. The fake bracket and then the V shape for the walkway. Turned out okay. Boop, boop. And yeah. I think it's all right. So I'm going to head out. Keep asking questions, keep learning.